Hello there. Within the last hour, the authorities in Los Angeles have been giving more details about their investigation into the deaths of the actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa.
In the serene city of Santa Fe, New Mexico, a sudden event shook everyone who admired the legendary movie star Gene Hackman. A neighbor who noticed something was wrong called the police, worried that Gene and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, hadn't been seen in quite some time. The officers who arrived found a scene that nobody could have predicted. Gene and Betsy, both lifeless, each in a different room. One of their 3 dogs was also deceased, while the other 2 were alive, yet clearly traumatized. It was a heartbreaking moment that sent waves of shock through the neighborhood and the world as fans learned that a bright star had been extinguished in such an unsettling way. People immediately started asking questions. Could it have been a quiet passing caused by illness? Or had something more sinister happened? At first, the idea of a gas leak seemed reasonable, since carbon monoxide poisoning can take victims without warning. But when investigators found no trace of a leak, the mystery only grew. Why had John and Betsy passed away around the same time, unseen by anyone for days? For such a famous figure, it felt chilling that there was no fanfare or final farewell, only silence and unanswered questions. The public was not just shocked by the news itself, but also by how Gene's children reacted. Leslie, one of John's daughters, spoke to reporters and explained she hadn't talked to her father in several months. She lived in California while Gene and Betsy were in Santa Fe, and although they were close in spirit, they rarely spoke on the phone. According to Leslie, Gene seemed to be in decent health for a man of his age. He was known to do yoga and Pilates regularly. He appeared far from frail, making his sudden death an even bigger surprise. What made headlines, however, was that Leslie did not immediately rush to Santa Fe. Instead, she decided to wait until the police finished their investigation. Critics felt she was not showing proper respect or concern, especially since the world had just lost an icon. Some tabloids claimed she sold her story about her father's death to a newspaper, sparking debate about whether she was grieving or looking to profit from the tragedy. Gene's grandson, Tim, added more layers to the story. He revealed that he hadn't seen John for 11 years, since Tim's father's funeral. Evidently, John had chosen a very private life in his final years, with little communication or contact with family. This raised a question that nobody could quite answer. Had John cut himself off from others, or had his loved ones drifted away from him? Regardless, the gap between John and his family stood out starkly after his death. John Hackman was no ordinary actor. He was a man who overcame an incredible amount of pain, using his struggles to bring depth and intensity to every role he played. Born into a difficult home life, he learned early on that the world could be harsh. He grew up under the watch of his father, Eugene, who was known for his strict and sometimes violent ways. The family moved often because Eugene's printing job wasn't stable, leaving them without a permanent place to settle. When Gene was just 13, the foundation of his life crumbled. One day his father drove away, waved at him from the car window, and never came back. The shock of being abandoned left John with scars that shaped much of his later life. Even as an adult, he could hardly speak about that moment without tears. John had to lean on his mother and grandmother for support, but life didn't get much easier. His grandmother wasn't particularly warm or welcoming, and he felt like an unwanted guest in his own family. The only person who truly encouraged him was his mother. She believed he could become a star, telling him he had the spark needed for acting. Yet tragedy struck in 1962 when she died in a fire caused by a lit cigarette. John lost the one guiding light that gave him hope. She never got to see him fulfill his dream of becoming an actor, and he never got to show her that her faith in him was justified. As Gene navigated life, he found a dear friend in Norman Gary. Norman wasn't just a companion, he was also an entertainment lawyer who helped Gene manage his contracts and finances. Gene trusted Norman deeply, so when Norman died by suicide in 1982, it left Gene reeling. He found himself wondering if he missed signs of his friend's distress or if he could have intervened. This was yet another instance of someone close to John vanishing without warning, reinforcing the fear that those he cared about would inevitably leave. Some say that John poured his heartbreak into his acting, using every role as a kind of therapy session. His career soared, earning him multiple awards and respect across the film industry. On screen, he was the tough guy, the police officer, the cowboy, or the complex character fighting inner demons. Off screen, he was a man carrying wounds from repeated loss: father, mother, friend, nursing. Those old hurts with each step he took. Jean tried to build a stable home life by marrying Faye in 1956. They had children and seemed like a happy unit from the outside. But Jean's pursuit of success in Hollywood left little time for domestic bliss. While he jumped from one movie set to another, Faye and the children were left waiting at home. As fame grew, so did the distance between Jean and his family. By 1986, after 3 decades together, Jean and Faye divorced quietly, without the angry battles that sometimes accompany such separations. He later admitted he regretted not being around more for his children. In an interview, he remarked he had no advice to give his son because he had missed too much of his upbringing. This regret stayed with him for the rest of his life, a painful reminder that success often demands sacrifices we may only come to understand when it's too late. His later marriage to Betsy Arakawa provided companionship, but the heartbreak over his first marriage and the fading closeness with his children was something he carried with him always. Aside from acting, Jean had another passion: speed racing. For him, stepping onto a racetrack was a break from the everyday stresses of Hollywood. He joined the Sports Car Club of America and competed in major events like the 24 Hours of Daytona. Racing gave him a chance to feel alive, to channel his inner daredevil without having to pretend. Yet the sport was fraught with danger. He survived spin-outs and crashes, one of which could have ended his life. Despite the risks, he loved the thrill and found peace in the roar of engines, the smell of burning rubber, and the laser-sharp focus he needed to navigate each twist of the track. Jean's enthusiasm for cars was not flashy. Over time, he owned vehicles that were practical, strong, and simple. Even after leaving the racetrack, he found comfort in an unassuming Toyota Tundra. Spotting him at a gas station with a pickup truck might have surprised some fans, but to Jean, it reflected who he was at heart. A man who appreciated reliable machinery and who had nothing left to prove in terms of status or wealth. After retiring from acting in 2004, Jean didn't vanish into boredom. He turned to writing novels, producing 5 books that showed yet another side of his talent. Each story contained echoes of themes he had tackled as an actor: perseverance, bravery, human relationships, and moral dilemmas. Writing allowed him total creative control, something he rarely had in Hollywood. As an author, there were no directors, producers, or studios shaping his choices. He also discovered peace in painting, though he kept his artwork private. After decades under the public eye, painting gave him a personal corner of the world where he could create without anyone judging him. He admitted he preferred not to show these paintings to others, cherishing them as a calm retreat rather than a performance for an audience. For a man who had experienced so many public highs and lows, a private hobby must have felt like a deep well of relief. Jean's tough image wasn't just for movies. Even in his 70s, he was involved in a street fight after a small car accident, refusing to let younger men push him around. Police arrived, no arrests were made, but the incident reminded fans of the gritty characters he once portrayed on the big screen. Then, in 2012, he got hit by a truck while biking in Florida. At an age when most people are cautious about physical activities, Jean shrugged off the accident with minimal injuries and returned home the same day. He had other brushes with danger while cycling in the Florida Keys, proving that although he valued health and fitness, he also wasn't one to cower from risk. Some said it was his Marine Corps background. Others believed it was simply how he was wired, a man born to test his limits no matter how many birthdays he'd celebrated. When Jean was a teenager, he forged his birth certificate to join the United States Marine Corps. He was desperate to escape the turbulence of his broken home. Although he didn't exactly thrive in the strict environment, his role as a radio technician took him to unfamiliar places like China, broadening his worldview. He struggled with authority and earned a record of disciplinary issues. Once he even wrecked a motorcycle after hitting a tractor, an event that nearly cost him his life. But the Marines taught Jean about perseverance. Even if he clashed with superiors, he learned the importance of discipline, teamwork, and mental toughness, qualities he carried into his acting career. As a result, his roles always felt authentic, as though he'd really been through the ringer before stepping onto the set. Fans believed him, not just because of his dramatic skill, but because of the intangible grit that underpinned every performance. Everything about Gene's life screamed resilience, which is why his final days remain so puzzling. For a man who once threw himself into the hardest parts of life, his quiet end seems almost out of character. He and Betsy were discovered in their Santa Fe home, days after they had passed. No official cause of death was found, leaving carbon monoxide poisoning as one possibility, yet the investigators ruled out a gas leak. So fans and family are left with an unsolved riddle about how these two seemingly healthy individuals could depart the world without warning. Beyond the cause of death, there's the emotional mystery. Why did no one notice? Did the family simply not keep in close touch? Did Jean wish to withdraw from everyone? In retirement, he had grown more isolated, avoiding interviews and premieres. Perhaps he relished the freedom of invisibility after years of being in the public eye. Perhaps he was tired of heartbreak and wanted to live out his days in a bubble of peace with Betsy and their dogs. We may never truly know. Gene's children, especially Leslie, became focal points of media attention after his death. Since she waited for the investigation rather than heading straight to Santa Fe, rumors circulated about their relationship. But grieving is personal, and it's possible she wanted clear answers before confronting the reality of her father's passing. It's also likely there were long-standing emotional distances that might have made her uncertain about how to handle the situation. Perhaps heartbreak had piled up over the decades, making face-to-face farewells feel incredibly difficult. The outcome is the same, a significant gap between a father who once soared to fame and children who grew older with him, mostly in the background. Family ties can be complicated, and any reparation that might have happened never took place. This adds another layer of tragedy because there was no cinematic reunion, no final scene that healed old wounds. Instead, it ended with two adults living many miles apart, maintaining only occasional phone calls and a painful sense of too little, too late. For someone in 5th grade or anyone curious about life lessons, Gene Hackman's story can be summed up in a few key points. First, he showed that no matter how tough your childhood is, you can still become successful if you focus and channel your pain into something productive. Gene's father left him, his mother died in a tragic accident, and his grandmother wasn't affectionate. Yet he turned that hurt into motivation to excel, rising to the top of his profession. Second, he teaches us that success comes at a price. In chasing his dream, he neglected his family at times, which led to estrangement and divorce. Fame may bring money and admiration, but it doesn't guarantee peace at home. Third, he shows the power of resilience. Whether it was forging a path in Hollywood, racing cars, or surviving accidents well into his senior years, Gene kept moving forward even after devastating losses. Yet his final message might be that loneliness can sneak up on anyone, even a person who once dazzled the world. By the end, the closeness that many people crave was missing from his life. He spent his last chapter away from the spotlight, rarely seen in public. Some might find that romantic, a sign that he valued a quiet life. Others see it as sad that a man who gave so much to audiences might have needed a warmer farewell. Gene Hackman's legacy in film is monumental. Whether in dramas, thrillers, or action flicks, he had a knack for stealing every scene he was in. Movies like The French Connection, or Unforgiven, showcase not just his acting skill, but the emotional weight he carried into each character. Fans still watch these films today, awed by the rawness and complexity he displayed. His writing career may not have reached the same heights, but it remains a testament to his endless creativity. Through his novels, John opened a window into the thoughts and emotions that shaped him. He wrote about adventure, conflict, and resilience, all reflections of his own experiences. In some ways, his books provide as much insight into who he was as any film role could. They tell us that underneath the Hollywood tough guy was a man who loved stories, yearned for understanding, and battled loneliness from his earliest days. We are left with many unanswered questions. How exactly did Gene and Betsy spend their final days? Did they sense something was wrong, or did it happen suddenly? Why didn't any family member notice sooner? Was it simply that everyone assumed the couple was fine, living as they always had? And what about the dog that passed away with them? What caused its death when the other dog survived? These mysteries may never be solved. The officials in Santa Fe concluded there was no sign of foul play, leaving natural causes as the likeliest explanation. But that doesn't quiet the sense of unease many people feel when they think of such a beloved star passing away in near seclusion. Gene Hackman's life was a whirlwind of sorrow, triumph, and perseverance. From a difficult childhood to global fame, he showed the world how talent and determination can break barriers. Yet he also demonstrated that nobody is invincible to heartbreak. If anything, his final chapter underscores how important it is to stay connected to the people we love. No matter how successful we become, it means little if we must face our last moments alone. As we reflect on Jean's story, we should remind ourselves of a few key lessons. First, keep family close, even when life pulls you in different directions. Second, let heartbreak fuel you to grow instead of letting it destroy you. Third, embrace your passions, whether it's acting, writing, painting, or even racing. Lastly, remember that every life ends, so treasure your time and let the people who matter know you care about them. Although Gene Hackman's physical life has ended, his spirit remains in every film, every novel, and every memory he left behind. Fans can still watch his classic performances, which feel fresh and alive even years after they were made. As new generations discover his work, they'll be drawn in by the grit and depth that made him an icon. In that sense, he lives on, continuing to inspire anyone who faces adversity and wonders if they can overcome it. It's fitting that his ending remains a bit mysterious. Gene was never one to follow Hollywood's script. He chose his own path, from braving heartbreak in his youth to forging a career on his own terms, to retiring quietly in the desert of New Mexico. Though we wish he could have had a happier conclusion, perhaps this ending is the one he found fitting, a final bow away from the spotlight, just him, Betsy, and the quiet hush of Santa Fe. In telling Gene Hackman's story to a younger audience or anyone new to his legacy, it's important to remember that life is rarely fair or easy. We all face losses and heartbreak, and we don't always get the closure we desire. Gene's life is proof that a person can channel their struggles into something profound, like art. At the same time, it's a cautionary tale about how the pursuit of success may leave us lonely if we're not careful. So watch his films, read his books, and appreciate the passion he put into everything. Remember him for the talent and determination that turned him into a Hollywood legend. If there's a final lesson, it's that each of us has the power to keep going despite hardships, to reinvent ourselves when needed, and to create a life that, while not perfect, can still be meaningful. That might be the greatest gift Gene Hackman left us. A story of a fighter who never stopped battling, right up to that puzzling last moment when the world said goodbye with both sadness and awe.